the most beautiful love story between a widowed English duke, who still speaks to the silence of his empty house and carries grief like a curse, and a young artist unjustly accused by her own family, betrayed, cast out, and treated as a disgrace, until the day sees in her brushstrokes the truth no one else dared to face, and realizes that saving her may cost him his name, but losing her may cost what remains of his heart. The window was a trap, and Isabella knew it. She had learned, over 24 years of careful disappearance, that being seen was dangerous. Yet tonight, as the carriages rolled up the gravel path and oil lamps flickered against the grand stone facade of Varga Manor, she couldn't help herself. Her hands pressed against the cool glass, her breath fogging the pain as she watched the spectacle unfold below, a performance she was never meant to witness. The evening had been meticulously orchestrated. Aunt Helena had spent weeks preparing, her sharp voice echoing through corridors as she directed servants, adjusted floral arrangements, and inspected Clara's wardrobe with the intensity of a general preparing for war. This dinner was not about hospitality. It was about survival. The Varga fortune, once vast and glittering, had been reduced to dust and debt by Helena's years of reckless spending. Only one path remained, a strategic marriage, and Clara, beautiful, polished, and perfectly trained, was the weapon Helena intended to deploy. Isabella had been instructed to stay in her room, out of sight, Helena had said, her tone cold and final. We cannot afford distractions. The words stung less than they once had. Isabella had grown accustomed to being called a distraction, a mistake, a burden. She was the niece no one claimed, the orphan fed with leftovers, dressed in hand-me-downs, kept in the shadows like a shameful secret. Her existence was tolerated only because blood, however inconvenient, still meant something. From her window, she watched the Duke of Blackwood arrive. Even from a distance, there was something striking about him. He moved with the quiet authority of a man who had stopped caring what others thought, his dark coat perfectly tailored, his expression unreadable. Adrian Blackwood. She had heard the whispers among the servants. A widower haunted by grief, a father clinging to a young son, a man pressured by duty to remarry. Helena saw him as salvation. Clara saw him as a title. Isabella saw only a stranger stepping into a trap. She pulled back from the window just as his gaze lifted. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, or seemed to. Isabella froze, her pulse hammering in her chest. Then she ducked away, heart racing, pressing her back against the wall. Had he seen her? Would he mention it? Would Helena punish her for something as simple as existing in the wrong place at the wrong time? Downstairs, the dinner began. Isabella could hear the muffled sounds of laughter, the clinking of silverware, Helena's practiced charm oozing through every word. Clara would be radiant tonight, performing virtue and grace with the skill of an actress. Lily, the younger daughter, would be silent, obedient, swallowing her discomfort as she always did. And Isabella would remain here, locked away, invisible. She moved to her small desk, where charcoal and paper lay scattered like remnants of a forgotten life. Drawing was the only thing she had that was truly hers. In the lines and shadows, she found proof that she still existed. Tonight, she sketched a window, bars of light cutting through darkness, a hand reaching toward something just out of frame. She didn't know what it meant. She only knew it felt true. Hours passed. The house grew quiet. Isabella assumed the guests had retired to their rooms. She had been good. She had stayed hidden. But the air in her small chamber felt suffocating, the walls pressing in like a coffin. She needed to breathe. Just for a moment. Just once. Her hand found the old key tucked beneath the loose floorboard, a gift from Mrs. Brennan, the elderly housekeeper who had been the closest thing to a mother Isabella ever had. The woman had been dismissed months ago for showing Isabella too much kindness. Before she left, she pressed the key into Isabella's palm and whispered, "Even cages need doors, child." Isabella unlocked her door and slipped into the hallway, barefoot and silent. The house was a labyrinth of shadows and moonlight. She moved through it like a ghost, her heart pounding with every creak of the floorboards. When she finally reached the back door and stepped into the garden, The night air hit her like a blessing. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, letting the cool wind tangle her hair. "You shouldn't be out here." The voice was low, steady, and far too close. Isabella's eyes flew open. Standing just a few feet away, half hidden in the shadow of an old oak tree, was the Duke of Blackwood, Adrian. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Curiosity, perhaps, or suspicion. Her instinct was to run, but her legs wouldn't move. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice small and broken. "I didn't mean to disturb you." "You didn't," he said simply. He stepped closer, and she instinctively stepped back. He stopped. "Who are you?" The question was a knife. Who was she? The mistake. The burden. The girl who didn't belong. "I'm no one," she said finally. "Just a servant." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze trailing over her simple dress, her bare feet, the charcoal stains still faint on her fingers. "A servant," he repeated quietly. He didn't believe her. She could see it in his eyes, but he didn't press. "You're afraid." It wasn't a question. Isabella swallowed hard, fighting the urge to disappear entirely. "Please don't tell anyone I was here." Adrian watched her, something shifting in his expression, something that looked almost like recognition. "I won't," he said. It was a promise. Simple, honest, and for reasons Isabella couldn't explain, she believed him. She turned and fled back into the house, her heart racing, her mind reeling. Behind her, Adrian remained in the garden, staring after her long after she had gone. Isabella barely slept. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the encounter in the garden over and over. The Duke's voice, his promise, the way he had looked at her, not with pity, not with disgust, but with something she couldn't name. It unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. Cruelty she understood. Kindness was dangerous. By dawn, she heard the commotion downstairs. Voices raised. Footsteps hurried. Something had changed. Isabella pressed her ear to the door, trying to make sense of the muffled words. Then she heard Helena's voice, sharp and commanding. "Find her. Now." Her blood turned cold. The door burst open without warning. Helena stood in the doorway, her face twisted with fury barely contained beneath a mask of composure. Behind her, Clara looked pale, and Lily, dear, quiet Lily, wouldn't meet Isabella's eyes. "Get dressed," Helena snapped. Immediately. Isabella's hands trembled as she pulled on the only decent dress she owned, the fabric worn thin at the seams. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew it was bad. Helena didn't come to her room. Helena pretended she didn't exist. Downstairs. Now, Isabella followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The grand foyer felt like a stage, and she was being dragged into the spotlight. Servants lingered at the edges, their expressions a mix of curiosity and pity. And there, near the entrance, stood Adrian Blackwood and his father, Lord Edward, an older man with silver hair and eyes like steel. Helena's performance began before Isabella even reached the bottom of the stairs. "I am horrified," she declared, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "Absolutely horrified. To think that someone under my roof would." She turned to Isabella, her eyes glittering with venom. "Where is it?" Isabella froze. "Where's what?" "The brooch. My mother's diamond brooch. It's been missing since last night, and you were seen wandering the house when you should have been in your quarters." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Isabella's vision blurred. I would never." "Empty your pockets. Your bag. Everything. Aunt Helena, please." "Do not call me that." Helena's voice turned to ice. She gestured sharply to a servant, who hurried forward with Isabella's small, battered suitcase. The woman opened it roughly, spilling its contents onto the marble floor. A few worn dresses, a bundle of drawings, a ribbon, nothing more. But Helena wasn't finished. "Search her room. Tear it apart if you must." Adrian stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "This seems excessive for a missing piece of jewelry." Helena turned to him with practiced grace, dabbing at her eyes. "Your Grace, I apologize that you must witness this ugliness. But theft is a serious matter, and I cannot allow sentiment to cloud my judgment, even if the accused is related to me." Isabella's breath caught. Related. The word hung in the air like an admission and a condemnation all at once. Lord Edward's gaze sharpened. Related. Helena hesitated, then sighed as if the truth were being dragged from her against her will. "She is my late brother's child, a niece, though I've done my best to care for her despite circumstances. And this is how I'm repaid." "You've cared for me?" Isabella's voice cracked. The words escaped before she could stop them. "You've hidden me, starved me, treated me like I was nothing. How dare you speak to me that way?" Helena's mask slipped, fury flashing across her face. "After everything I've done, feeding you, housing you, tolerating your presence when you've been nothing but a burden." "Enough." Adrian's voice cut through the room like a blade. He moved closer to Isabella, his presence suddenly a shield. "If you're accusing her of theft, where's your evidence? The brooch hasn't been found in her possession." "It's only a matter of time," Helena insisted. "She must be removed from this house immediately. I will not harbor a thief." "Then let her speak." Adrian turned to Isabella, his gaze steady. "Tell me the truth. Did you take anything from this house?" Isabella met his eyes, and for the first time in her life, she didn't look away. "No," she whispered. "I took nothing. I am nothing here. I never have been." The silence that followed was deafening. Lily took a small, trembling step forward. "Mother," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "There's no brooch. You sold it months ago. I was there." Helena's face drained of color. Clara gasped, and in that moment, the carefully constructed lie collapsed like a house of cards. Adrian's expression darkened. He looked at Helena with something close to disgust, then back at Isabella. "Pack your things," he said quietly. "You're coming with me." Isabella stood frozen, unable to process what had just been said. Coming with him? She looked at Adrian, then at Helena, whose face had turned from shock to cold calculation. Lily trembled near the staircase, her small act of courage already draining the color from her cheeks. "You cannot be serious, Your Grace," Helena said, recovering quickly. "She is my responsibility. Whatever misunderstanding has occurred, it is a family matter." "She is not your responsibility," Adrian said quietly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You've made that abundantly clear." Lord Edward observed the scene with sharp eyes, saying nothing, but his expression suggested he was cataloging every word, every gesture. Isabella felt his gaze on her like a weight. "I don't understand," Isabella whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why would you?" "Because no one should be treated this way," Adrian said simply. He turned to a servant. "Help her gather her belongings." "There's nothing to gather," Isabella said, looking at the sad pile of clothes still scattered on the marble floor. Everything she owned could fit in one small bag. It was a humiliating truth laid bare for everyone to see. Within minutes, her few possessions were collected. Helena said nothing more, but her eyes promised that this was not over. Clara looked away, unwilling to witness the collapse of her mother's plans. Only Lily met Isabella's gaze, tears streaming silently down her face, her lips forming words she couldn't speak aloud. "I'm sorry." Isabella wanted to tell her it was all right, that she understood, but the words caught in her throat. Lily had saved her, yes, but only after years of silence. The gratitude and the grief were too tangled to separate. Adrian gestured toward the door. "Come." Isabella followed him outside, clutching her bag, her bare feet still cold against the stone steps. A carriage waited, elegant and imposing, with the Blackwood crest emblazoned on its side. Lord Edward climbed in first, his face inscrutable. Adrian held the door open for Isabella, and she hesitated. "I don't belong in there," she said quietly. "You don't belong back there either," Adrian replied. "Get in." She obeyed because she had nowhere else to go. The ride to Blackwood Manor was silent. Lord Edward stared out the window, his jaw tight. Adrian sat across from Isabella, his gaze occasionally drifting to her, though he said nothing. Isabella kept her eyes on her hands, folded tightly in her lap, trying to make herself as small as possible. When they finally arrived, Isabella's breath caught. The manor was enormous, far grander than Varga House, but somehow less cold. Ivy climbed the stone walls, and the gardens, though slightly wild, had a kind of beauty that felt alive rather than controlled. A housekeeper met them at the door, a woman with kind eyes and silver hair pinned neatly beneath a cap. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying. Then her gaze fell on Isabella, and her expression softened. "And who is this?" "A guest," Adrian said firmly. "Prepare the blue room. She'll need fresh clothes, a warm bath, and a meal." "Of course, sir." Isabella followed the housekeeper, Mrs. Davison. She said her name was up a grand staircase and down a hallway lined with portraits. The blue room was more than Isabella had ever imagined. A large bed with clean linens, a writing desk near the window, curtains that looked soft enough to dissolve in her hands. "I'll have water brought up shortly," Mrs. Davison said gently. "Are you all right, dear?" Isabella didn't know how to answer that. She nodded. Left alone, she walked slowly around the room, afraid to touch anything. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Any moment, someone would realize the mistake and send her back. Or worse, demand something in return. That evening, after she had bathed and changed into a simple but clean dress someone had left for her, there was a soft knock on the door. Adrian stood in the hallway, his expression carefully neutral. "I wanted to make sure you were settled," he said. "I am. Thank you." Isabella hesitated. "Why did you do this?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment. "Because I saw you last night in that garden," he said finally, "and I recognized something I hadn't seen in a long time." "What?" Someone who had forgotten they were allowed to exist. His words settled into her chest like stones. Before she could respond, he nodded once and turned to leave. "Your Grace," she called softly. He paused. "I don't know how to repay you." "Then don't," he said, and he walked away. Isabella woke to sunlight. Real, warm sunlight streaming through tall windows, not the thin gray light that used to seep through the crack in her attic room. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory returned, the accusation, the carriage, Adrian's quiet declaration, and her chest tightened with uncertainty. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Davison entered with a tray. "Good morning, dear. I've brought you breakfast." Isabella sat up quickly. "I can come downstairs." "I don't need." "Nonsense. His Grace thought you might prefer a quiet morning after yesterday's ordeal." Mrs. Davison set the tray on the small table by the window. Warm bread, butter, jam, tea. More food than Isabella usually saw in a week. "Take your time. When you're ready, you're welcome to explore the house and grounds. Though," she hesitated, "His Grace did ask that you avoid the East Wing for now. The young master is there, and, well, it's complicated." "The young master?" "Noah, the Duke's son. He's 6 years old, and—" Mrs. Davison's expression softened with sadness. "He's been through a great deal. His Grace is protective." Isabella understood immediately. She was a stranger, an outsider. Of course Adrian wouldn't want her near his child. The reminder of her place stung, but she nodded. "I'll be careful." After Mrs. Davison left, Isabella ate slowly, savoring each bite, still half convinced it would be taken away. Then she dressed and ventured into the hallway. The house was quiet, enormous, and surprisingly warm. She found herself drawn to the library, a vast room lined floor to ceiling with books, leather chairs positioned near a fireplace, and light pouring in from high windows. She ran her fingers along the spines, overwhelmed. At Varga Manor, she'd been forbidden from touching Helena's books. Here, no one stopped her. She pulled out a volume of poetry and settled into a chair, losing herself in words that felt like they'd been written for someone else's life. "Who are you?" Isabella startled, nearly dropping the book. A small boy stood in the doorway, clutching a wooden horse. He had Adrian's dark hair and serious eyes, but there was something fragile about him, like glass held together by sheer will. "I'm Isabella." she said carefully, remembering Mrs. Davison's warning. I'm a guest. We don't have guests, Noah said matter-of-factly. He stepped closer, curious. Why are you here? Your father was kind enough to help me when I needed it. Noah considered this. Are you going to leave? The question was so direct, so full of hidden fear, that Isabella's heart clenched. I don't know, she answered honestly. I haven't been told. Everyone leaves, Noah said quietly. He looked down at his wooden horse. My mother left. Mrs. Brennan left. Even grandfather says he'll leave soon. Isabella didn't know what to say. She understood loss, but this child's grief was different, raw and unhealed. I'm sorry, she whispered. Before Noah could respond, Adrian appeared in the doorway. His expression shifted from surprise to something harder when he saw them together. Noah, he said quietly, what did I tell you about wandering off? I heard voices, Noah said, not quite defiant but not apologetic either. I wanted to see. Adrian's jaw tightened. He looked at Isabella, and she saw it clearly now, fear. Not of her exactly, but of what she represented. Another person Noah might grow attached to. Another loss waiting to happen. Go find Mrs. Davison, Adrian said to his son. It's time for your lessons. Noah obeyed reluctantly, casting one last glance at Isabella before disappearing down the hall. Adrian remained, the silence between them heavy. I'm sorry, Isabella said quickly. I didn't mean to. It's a large house, Adrian interrupted. I understand. But Noah, he paused, searching for words. He's been through enough. I can't let him become attached to someone who might not stay. The implication was clear. Isabella was temporary. A guest, not a fixture. She nodded, swallowing the irrational hurt. I understand. Adrian looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he simply nodded and left. Isabella sat alone in the library, surrounded by books she was allowed to touch and a kindness she wasn't allowed to keep. She opened her book again, but the words blurred. In the margins of her mind, she began sketching. A boy with sad eyes, a man building walls, and a girl who had learned too well how to disappear. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Days passed in a strange rhythm. Isabella existed in the spaces between, present but not rooted, visible but not claimed. She ate meals alone in her room, walked the gardens when she was certain they were empty, and spent hours in the library, drawing on scraps of paper Mrs. Davison quietly provided. The housekeeper had become her only real contact, a gentle presence who asked no questions and offered small kindnesses without expectation. Adrian kept his distance. Isabella saw him occasionally, crossing the hallway, riding out at dawn, standing in his study with documents spread before him like battle plans. He never stopped to speak. She told herself it was better this way, safer. But Noah was harder to avoid. The boy had a talent for appearing when least expected. He'd slip into the library while she was reading, sit across from her without a word, and play with his wooden horse. At first, Isabella tried to leave when he arrived, remembering Adrian's warning. But Noah's loneliness was a mirror of her own, and she found she couldn't walk away. "Why do you draw so much?" he asked one afternoon, watching her sketch the view from the window. "It helps me remember I'm real," Isabella said before she could stop herself. Noah tilted his head, considering. "Do you forget sometimes?" "Yes, me too." He was quiet for a moment. "Will you draw my horse?" Isabella hesitated, then nodded. She sketched quickly. The worn wooden toy, the way Noah's small hands cradled it protectively. When she finished, she tore the page out and handed it to him. Noah's face lit up with something she hadn't seen before, joy. "Can I keep it?" "Of course." He clutched the drawing like treasure. "Thank you, Isabella." It was the first time in her life someone had thanked her for simply being herself. Their meetings became routine. Noah would find her, and they'd sit together in comfortable silence, occasionally sharing words, but mostly just existing in each other's presence. Isabella learned that his mother had died when he was 3, that he barely remembered her voice, that his father didn't like talking about her because it made the sadness too loud. "Do you have a mother?" Noah asked one day. "I did once," Isabella said carefully. "She died when I was very young. I don't remember her either." Then we're the same. The simplicity of it nearly broke her. "Yes," she whispered. "I suppose we are." It was inevitable that Adrian would discover them. He came to the library one afternoon and froze in the doorway. Noah was asleep, his head resting against Isabella's shoulder, the drawing of his horse still clutched in his hand. Isabella had been reading aloud, a story about knights and dragons, and hadn't noticed when the boy had drifted off. Adrian's expression was unreadable, but Isabella saw his hands tighten at his sides. "I'm sorry," she whispered, careful not to wake Noah. "I tried to keep distance, but he kept finding me, and I didn't have the heart." "How long has this been happening?" "A few days, maybe a week." Isabella felt Noah's weight against her, warm and trusting, and her chest ached. "I'll stop. I'll stay in my room if you prefer." Adrian was silent for a long moment, studying them both. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. "He hasn't slept that peacefully in months." Isabella looked up, surprised. "He has nightmares," Adrian continued, moving closer. "Almost every night. He wakes up screaming, convinced everyone is gone." He crouched beside them, his gaze on his son. "I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to help him." "You love him," Isabella said softly. "That's not nothing. It doesn't feel like enough." Adrian reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Noah's forehead with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his usual reserve. Then his eyes met Isabella's. "You're good with him. He's easy to care for." "No," Adrian said. "He's not. He's guarded, afraid. He doesn't trust easily." He paused. "But he trusts you." Isabella didn't know what to say. The weight of Noah against her shoulder, the intensity of Adrian's gaze, it was too much. "I need to ask you something," Adrian said quietly. "And I need you to be honest. Do you plan to stay?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Isabella thought of Varga Manor, of having nowhere else to go, of the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could belong somewhere. "I don't know," she whispered. "No one's ever wanted me to stay before." Adrian held her gaze. "Then perhaps it's time someone did." The question lingered between them, like an unspoken promise, too fragile to name. Adrian carried Noah to bed that evening, and Isabella returned to her room with her heart beating in an unfamiliar rhythm, something between hope and fear. But hope, she had learned, was a dangerous companion. The next morning, Lord Edward summoned her to his study. Isabella had barely spoken to Adrian's father since arriving, and his presence unsettled her. He was a man who saw too much, whose silence felt like judgment. She entered to find him seated behind a massive oak desk, papers spread before him. He gestured to a chair without preamble. "Sit," Isabella obeyed, folding her hands in her lap to stop them from trembling. "My son has made an unusual decision bringing you here," Lord Edward began, his tone measured. "He claims it was an act of decency. I'm inclined to believe there's more to it." "I assure you, my lord, I have no designs." He raised a hand, silencing her. "I'm not accusing you of anything. Yet." He leaned back, studying her with sharp eyes. "What I am doing is trying to understand who you are. Isabella Moreau, niece of Helena Varga, daughter of the late Marcus Moreau." "Yes, I've made inquiries." Isabella's breath caught. No one had spoken her father's name in years. "Your father was a marquis," Lord Edward continued, "a man of considerable standing before his untimely death, which makes your current circumstances curious." He pulled out a document, sliding it across the desk. "Helena was appointed your guardian. She inherited the estate, with the stipulation that you be cared for until you came of age." Isabella stared at the paper, the words blurring. "She told me there was nothing, that I was a burden she charitably bore." She lied. Lord Edward's expression hardened. There was a substantial inheritance. Property, investments, enough to ensure you lived comfortably. Helena has been siphoning it for years, keeping you dependent and ignorant. The room tilted. Isabella gripped the edge of the desk, trying to breathe. Everything she'd believed about herself, that she was worthless, unwanted, a mistake, had been built on lies. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because my son is falling in love with you," Lord Edward said bluntly. "And before this goes any further, I need to know what you intend to do with this information." Isabella's mind reeled. Falling in love? No, that was impossible. Adrian barely spoke to her. He'd warned her away from his son. He'd made it clear she was temporary. "I see you don't believe me," Lord Edward observed. "Perhaps you should pay closer attention. My son hasn't looked at anyone the way he looks at you since his wife died. And Noah," he paused. "Noah is attached, which means if you leave, you'll break two hearts, not one." "I never asked for any of this," Isabella said, her voice shaking. "I didn't ask to be brought here. I didn't ask to matter." "And yet you do." Lord Edward stood, walking to the window. "You have a choice now. You could pursue legal action against Helena, reclaim what's yours, build a life independent of this family. Or," he turned back to her, "you could stay. But understand, staying means consequences. Society will talk. They'll question your presence, your intentions. Adrian's reputation will suffer. Are you prepared for that?" Isabella's hands clenched in her lap. A life of her own. Independence. It was everything she'd never dared dream. But the cost was walking away from Noah's sleepy smile, from Mrs. Davison's kindness, from the way Adrian had looked at her in the library, like she was someone worth protecting. "I need time," she managed. "Time is a luxury," Lord Edward said, "but I'll grant you some. Think carefully, Miss Moreau. This decision will define the rest of your life." Isabella left the study in a daze. She wandered the grounds without seeing them, her mind a storm of revelations and impossible choices. She had value. She had worth, not because someone granted it to her, but because it had always been hers. But did she have the courage to claim it? That evening, she found herself in the garden where she'd first met Adrian. The memory felt like years ago rather than weeks. She sat on the stone bench, watching twilight paint the sky. "You're troubled." She turned to find Adrian approaching, his expression concerned. He sat beside her, not touching, but close enough that she felt his warmth. "Your father told me the truth," Isabella said quietly, "about my inheritance, about what Helena stole." Adrian nodded slowly. "I know. He consulted me before speaking with you." "Did you know before, when you brought me here?" "No, but I suspected something was wrong." He looked at her. "What will you do?" Isabella met his gaze, searching for answers she didn't have. "I don't know." Adrian didn't push for an answer. He simply sat beside her as darkness settled over the garden, the silence between them no longer uncomfortable, but strangely solid, something to lean against. "When Eleanor died," he said finally, his voice low, "I thought the world had ended. For months, I walked through this house like a ghost, talking to rooms she'd never enter again, holding conversations with silence." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Everyone told me time would heal it. They were wrong. Time just taught me how to carry it." Isabella listened, barely breathing. "Then you appeared at that window," Adrian continued, "and I saw someone else carrying something too heavy, someone who'd learned to make themselves small enough to survive." He turned to her, his eyes catching the moonlight. "I didn't bring you here out of pity, Isabella. I brought you here because I recognized you, and because I was tired of watching people disappear." The words settled into her chest, warm and terrifying. "Your father thinks you're falling in love with me." Adrian went very still. "My father has always been perceptive." "Are you?" The question escaped before Isabella could stop it, small and vulnerable in the darkness. "I don't know," Adrian admitted. "I promised myself I wouldn't feel anything again. It was safer, simpler." He looked at her with an intensity that made her heart stutter. "But then you sat in my library with my son sleeping on your shoulder, and I realized I had already failed." Isabella's breath caught. "I'm terrified." "Of what?" "Of believing this is real." of staying and discovering I don't actually belong here, of leaving and never knowing if I could have. Her voice cracked. I've spent my entire life being told I'm nothing, and now I'm supposed to believe I'm someone worth. She couldn't finish. You are, Adrian said firmly. With or without an inheritance, with or without this house, you are someone worth everything. Tears burned Isabella's eyes. She wanted to believe him, but belief required a kind of courage she wasn't sure she possessed. Over the following days, Isabella felt herself fracturing. Lord Edward's revelation had opened a door she'd never known existed, a chance to reclaim her name, her fortune, her autonomy. She could leave Blackwood Manor, pursue justice, build something entirely her own. But every time she considered it, she'd find Noah in the library, looking up at her with trust she didn't deserve, or she'd pass Adrian in the hallway, and the weight of unspoken words between them would make her chest ache. Mrs. Davison noticed her distress. You look like someone standing at a crossroads, dear, she said one afternoon while bringing tea. I am, Isabella admitted. I just don't know which path leads anywhere good. Then perhaps you're asking the wrong question. Mrs. Davison set down the tray, her expression kind. Instead of asking which path is good, ask which path is yours. The words echoed in Isabella's mind long after the housekeeper left. That evening, a letter arrived. Helena's handwriting, sharp and precise. Isabella's hands trembled as she opened it. Dearest Isabella, I have learned of your situation at Blackwood Manor and am devastated by the misunderstanding that led to your departure. A mother's love sometimes expresses itself imperfectly, and I fear my methods, though well-intentioned, have been misinterpreted. I ask that you return home, so we may reconcile properly. Your place is with family, not as a charity case among strangers. I await your swift return. With affection, Aunt Helena. Isabella read it twice, fury building with each word. The manipulation was transparent. Helena had heard about Lord Edward's investigation and was attempting to regain control before Isabella could act. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of cruelty, only calculated words designed to provoke guilt. She found Adrian in his study, the letter clutched in her fist. She's summoning me back, Isabella said, her voice shaking with anger she'd never allowed herself to feel. She's pretending it was all a misunderstanding, as if years of abuse can be erased with false affection. Adrian read the letter, his expression darkening. You're not going. No, Isabella said, and the word felt like power. I'm not, but I am going to face her. I'm going to take back what's mine, not because I need the money, but because I need her to know she doesn't own me anymore. Adrian studied her carefully. This will be a fight. Helena won't surrender easily. I know. Isabella met his gaze, something new burning in her chest, not hope, but determination. I'm done disappearing. I'm done being the mistake people hide. If I'm going to stay, she faltered, if I'm going to build a life, I need to face what I came from first. Adrian stood, moving around the desk until he stood before her. Then you won't face it alone. The journey back to Varga Manor felt different this time. Isabella sat in the carriage beside Adrian, Lord Edward across from them, and she was no longer the frightened girl fleeing in the night. She wore a dress Mrs. Davison had insisted she take, simple but elegant, the deep blue bringing out the color of her eyes. Her hair was properly arranged. She looked, for the first time in her life, like someone who mattered. Helena was waiting in the drawing room, Clara and Lily flanking her like decorative statues. The older woman's smile was venomous honey. Isabella, darling, how wonderful that you've come to your senses. I haven't come to reconcile, Isabella said, her voice steady. I've come to collect what's mine. Helena's smile faltered. I don't know what lies these people have filled your head with. The lies were yours. Lord Edward stepped forward, producing documents from his leather case. Marcus Morrow's will, the trust established for his daughter, and a detailed accounting of funds you've misappropriated over the past 16 years. Would you like me to read them aloud, or shall we discuss this civilly? The color drained from Helena's face. Clara looked confused, but Lily, quiet, observant Lily, showed no surprise at all. She'd known. Perhaps not the details, but enough. "You have no proof of wrongdoing," Helena said, recovering her composure. "I managed Isabella's affairs as her guardian. Every expense was justified, her food, her lodging. Her lodging." Isabella's voice cracked like a whip. "You locked me in an attic. You fed me scraps. You dressed me in rags while Clara wore silk." She stepped closer, anger giving her courage. "You told me I was nothing because you needed me to believe it. Because if I knew the truth, I might have fought back." "You ungrateful." Helena's mask shattered. "I took you in when no one else would. Your father's debts would have destroyed this family if I hadn't." "My father left no debts," Lord Edward interrupted coldly. "He left a fortune, which you've been stealing to fund your own failing estate and your daughter's prospects." He placed the documents on the table. "You have two choices. Sign over what remains of Isabella's inheritance and relinquish all claims to guardianship, or face legal action that will destroy what's left of your reputation." Helena looked like a cornered animal. Her gaze darted to Clara, to Lily, searching for support that didn't come. Clara looked away, unwilling to meet her mother's eyes. But Lily stepped forward, her voice small but clear. "Sign it, Mother. Please. Lily, you've done enough damage." Lily's hands trembled, but she didn't back down. "To Isabella. To us. To yourself. Just stop." The silence that followed was suffocating. Helena stared at her youngest daughter as if seeing a stranger. Then, with shaking hands, she picked up the pen and signed. Isabella watched the woman who had tormented her for years reduce herself to a signature. She expected to feel triumph, vindication. Instead, she felt only exhaustion and a strange, hollow pity. "The properties will be transferred within the week," Lord Edward said, gathering the documents. "You will receive a copy of the settlement. This matter is concluded." As they turned to leave, Lily caught Isabella's arm. "Wait." Her eyes were red-rimmed. "I'm sorry. For all of it. For staying silent when I should have spoken. For letting her—" Her voice broke. "I was a coward." Isabella looked at the girl who had saved her with the single truth. "You spoke when it mattered most," she said quietly. "That took courage." Lily nodded, tears spilling over. Could we ever?" "I don't know," Isabella said honestly. "But maybe someday." It was the kindest goodbye she could offer. The carriage ride back to Blackwood Manor was silent. Isabella stared out the window, processing what had just happened. She was free. She had her inheritance, her independence, her name restored. She could go anywhere, be anyone. But as the manor came into view, she realized that freedom wasn't about having choices. It was about knowing which choice was hers. Adrian walked her to the door. "What will you do now?" he asked. Isabella turned to face him, this man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had offered sanctuary without demands, who had stood beside her while she fought to reclaim herself. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to be honest." "Always. That night in the garden, you asked if I planned to stay." She took a breath. "I'm asking you now. Do you want me to?" Adrian's expression softened. "More than anything." "Then I will." The words felt like stepping off a cliff and discovering she could fly. "Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because this is where I choose to be." Isabella's decision to stay changed everything and nothing at once. She was no longer a guest, but she wasn't quite family either. She existed in a liminal space, and for the first time, that uncertainty didn't terrify her. It felt like possibility. Her inheritance, once transferred, proved substantial. Properties in the city, investments her father had made wisely, enough to secure independence for the rest of her life. Lord Edward helped her navigate the legalities, teaching her to read contracts and manage assets. "Power means nothing if you don't understand how to wield it," he told her. But Isabella found she had little interest in leaving. The city felt distant, abstract. Blackwood Manor had become something she'd never had before home. She spent her mornings with Noah, who had taken to following her like a shadow. They drew together in the library, played in the gardens, and she told him stories her own mother had once told her. Stories she hadn't realized she remembered until the words came tumbling out. Will you always be here? Noah asked one afternoon, his voice small. Isabella paused, choosing her words carefully. I plan to be. But Noah, even if people leave, it doesn't mean they stop caring. Sometimes people have to go, but the love stays. Did your mother love you before she left? Yes, Isabella whispered. Very much. Then maybe mine did too. Isabella pulled him close, and he didn't pull away. Her afternoons belonged to the estate. Adrian had begun including her in decisions, repairs needed, tenant concerns, harvest plans. At first, she'd protested, but he'd been firm. You're part of this household. You should understand how it functions. They worked side by side in his study, and slowly, the formality between them began to dissolve. She learned he took his coffee black, that he had a dry wit he rarely showed, that he carried the weight of responsibility like armor he couldn't remove. Do you ever resent it? She asked one day, reviewing ledgers. Being the Duke, having everyone depend on you. Adrian was quiet for a moment. I resent that I can't fail. There's no room for mistakes when people's livelihoods rest on your decisions. He looked at her. But lately, it's felt less heavy. Having someone to share it with helps. The words lingered between them, warm and weighted. Evenings were the hardest. After Noah went to bed, Isabella would find herself wandering the house, too restless to sleep, too uncertain to seek Adrian out. The tension between them was growing, unspoken feelings building like storm pressure. It broke one night in the library. Isabella was sketching by firelight when Adrian entered. He'd been away handling business in town, and she hadn't realized how much she'd missed his presence until she saw him in the doorway. You're still awake, he said. Couldn't sleep. He moved to pour himself a drink, then hesitated. May I sit? It's your library. It's yours too. He settled into the chair across from her. What are you drawing? Isabella turned the sketchbook. She'd been drawing the garden, the bench where everything had changed. Adrian studied it, something unreadable in his expression. Do you regret it? He asked quietly. Coming here. Staying. No. The answer was immediate, honest. Do you? Bringing me here. Never. He set down his glass, leaning forward. Isabella, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. Her heart began to race. When Eleanor died, I locked everything away. Grief, hope, the possibility of feeling anything again. I convinced myself it was strength, but it was just fear. His voice was raw. And then you appeared, and slowly, so slowly I didn't even notice, you dismantled every wall I'd built. You made me remember what it felt like to care, to want, to hope for something beyond just surviving. Isabella couldn't breathe. I'm not good at this, Adrian continued. I'm difficult, closed off. I have a son who will always come first, responsibilities that never end, and a past I can't erase. But despite all of that, he met her gaze, and the vulnerability there nearly broke her. I'm asking if you could see a future here, not as a guest or an employee, but as more. The question hung in the air, trembling. Define more, Isabella whispered. Adrian stood, crossing to kneel before her chair. He took her hand, his touch careful, reverent. As my partner, my equal. Eventually, if you're willing. He paused. As my wife. The world tilted. I know it's too soon, Adrian said quickly. I'm not asking you to answer now. I just need you to know that's where my heart is. That's what I want, if you'll have me. Isabella looked at this man who had saved her without realizing he was drowning too, who had given her space to become herself, who was offering not rescue, but partnership. Ask me again, she said softly, in the spring, when the roses bloom. Adrian's expression transformed, relief, joy, hope. I will. Winter settled over Blackwood Manor like a held breath. Snow blanketed the gardens, transforming the landscape into something from a fairy tale. Isabella watched the world turn white from the library window, a cup of tea warming her hands, and marveled at how different she felt from the girl who had arrived months ago. She was no longer afraid to take up space. Noah burst into the room, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Isabella, come outside. Father says we can build a snow fort." She laughed, setting down her tea. "A fort? That sounds serious." "Very serious," Adrian said from the doorway, a rare smile playing at his lips. "Apparently, we're defending against an invasion of snow dragons." "Well, we can't let the dragons win," Isabella said solemnly. Noah cheered, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the door. They spent the afternoon in the garden, building walls of snow while Noah commanded their defenses with the gravity of a general. Adrian worked beside Isabella, their shoulders brushing, their laughter mingling with Noah's shrieks of joy. At one point, Noah launched a snowball that hit Adrian square in the chest. The Duke's expression of mock outrage sent Noah running, giggling wildly, with Adrian in pursuit. Isabella watched them, her chest aching with something too big to name. This was what happiness looked like. That evening, after Noah had been tucked into bed, exhausted and happy, Adrian found Isabella in the music room. She discovered an old piano there and had been teaching herself to play, picking out melodies from memory. "I didn't know you played," Adrian said. "I don't really. My mother used to, I think. Sometimes my fingers remember things my mind doesn't." She played a few more notes, then stopped. "Adrian, can I ask you something?" "Always. Do you ever feel guilty for being happy again?" He was quiet for a long moment, coming to sit beside her on the piano bench. "Every day," he admitted. She was everything to me. When she died, I thought I'd die too. That whatever remained was just going through the motions." He looked at Isabella. "But then I realized something. She wouldn't have wanted me to stop living. She loved life too fiercely for that. And Noah deserves a father who can show him that loss doesn't mean the end of joy." "You think she'd understand? About us? I think she'd be grateful someone could reach me when I'd buried myself so deep." Adrian took Isabella's hand. "You're not replacing her. You're something entirely your own. And that's what makes this real." Isabella leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. "I'm glad I stayed." "So am I." The weeks passed in a rhythm of quiet contentment. Isabella continued working alongside Adrian, learning the intricacies of estate management. She discovered she had a talent for it, for listening to the tenants' concerns, for finding creative solutions to problems, for seeing the human element in every decision. Lord Edward watched her with approval. "You have your father's mind," he told her one afternoon. He would have been proud. The words settled into her heart like a blessing. She also began corresponding with Lily. Tentative letters at first, awkward and careful, but slowly they found a fragile connection. Lily wrote of leaving Varga Manor, of taking a position as a teacher in the village, of trying to build something of her own. "I'm learning what it means to be brave," one letter read. "I think I learned it from you." Isabella kept the letters in a drawer, small testimonies that people could change, that forgiveness was possible even when it was complicated. But not everything was peaceful. Rumors had begun circulating in society. The Duke of Blackwood, living with a young woman of questionable reputation. Tongues wagged, speculation grew. Some called Isabella an opportunist. Others suggested impropriety. The talk was vicious, designed to wound. Adrian wanted to ignore it. "Their opinions mean nothing," he said. But Isabella felt the weight of it. Every time they went to town, she saw the stares, heard the whispers. She was tarnishing his reputation simply by existing in his life. "Maybe I should take one of my properties in the city," she said one evening, her voice careful. "Create some distance until—" "No." Adrian's response was immediate, fierce. "I don't care what they say. You belong here." "But Noah loves you. I love you." The word spilled out unplanned. Adrian froze, as if surprised by his own declaration. Isabella's breath caught. "You love me?" "Yes." He said it simply, certainly. "I love you, and I won't let society's judgment take you away from us." Isabella crossed the room, taking his face in her hands. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have for a while. I was just too afraid to admit it." Adrian kissed her then, Softly at first, then deeper, years of loneliness and new hope mingling into something that felt like a promise. When they pulled apart, Isabella rested her forehead against his. Spring is still months away. Then we'll wait, Adrian said. But when the roses bloom, Isabella Moreau, I'm going to ask you properly. And I'm hoping you'll say yes. I will, she whispered. I already know I will. Spring arrived with a violence of color. The gardens exploded into life. Crocuses pushing through the last of the snow, daffodils nodding in the breeze, and finally the roses. They climbed the stone walls and spilled over archways, crimson and white and pale pink, filling the air with perfume. Isabella stood among them, breathing in the scent of new beginnings. They're beautiful this year, Mrs. Davison said, joining her with a basket for cutting. Haven't seen them bloom like this in ages. It's like the garden knows something special is coming. Isabella smiled, her heart fluttering with anticipation and nerves. Adrian hadn't mentioned his promise from winter, but she caught him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Waiting. The social pressure had continued throughout the winter. Several prominent families had cut ties with Adrian, scandalized by Isabella's presence. But others, kinder, more open-minded, had begun extending invitations, curious to meet the woman who had captured the reclusive Duke's attention. Lady Ashford, an elderly countess with a reputation for sharp wit and sharper judgment, had come to tea. Isabella had been terrified, but the old woman had studied her with shrewd eyes and declared, "You'll do. Much better than that simpering Hastings girl they kept trying to throw at him. At least you have a spine." It wasn't quite acceptance, but it was a start. Noah had grown bolder, more confident. He laughed more freely, played harder, and had stopped having nightmares. One evening, as Isabella tucked him into bed, he looked up at her with Adrian's serious eyes. "Are you going to be my mother?" Isabella's heart clenched. "Would you want me to be?" Noah considered this with the gravity only a child could manage. "I think so. I don't remember my first mother much, and that makes me sad. But having you makes me happy. Can I have both feelings?" "Yes, sweetheart. You can hold both. Sadness for what you lost, and happiness for what you have. That's called growing." "Then yes," Noah decided. "I want you to stay forever." Forever. The word used to terrify her. Now it felt like coming home. The evening of the spring equinox, Adrian found Isabella in the rose garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose gold. He looked nervous, more nervous than she'd ever seen him. "Walk with me," he asked. They moved through the garden in comfortable silence. The only sounds the crunch of gravel beneath their feet and the evening birdsong. Adrian led her to the bench where they'd sat that first night, when everything had been uncertain and fragile. "Do you remember what I asked you here?" Adrian said, "Months ago, when you were deciding whether to stay." "I remember. I told you to ask me again in the spring, when the roses bloomed." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Isabella, these months with you have been... I don't have words elegant enough. You've brought light back into this house. You've given Noah a reason to smile. You've given me a reason to hope." Isabella's eyes burned with tears. "You're brilliant and brave and so much stronger than you know. You've taken everything life stole from you and built something beautiful from the ruins." Adrian's voice wavered slightly. "I know I'm not easy. I know I come with complications, a title, responsibilities, a past that still haunts me sometimes. But I'm asking you, Isabella Moreau, if you'll have me anyway. If you'll marry me, not because you need protection or security, but because you choose this, because you choose us." He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple band with a deep blue sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "This was my grandmother's. She was, by all accounts, formidable and kind and entirely herself. My grandfather said she saved him from a life of comfortable emptiness. I thought..." He smiled softly. "I thought she'd want you to have it." Isabella looked at the ring, at this man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had helped her become someone she'd never dreamed she could be, who was offering not rescue, but partnership, not dependence, but choice. "Yes," she whispered. Yes, Adrian. 1,000 times yes. The ring slid onto her finger perfectly, as if it had always belonged there. Adrian pulled her close, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke of promises and futures and hope carefully rebuilt. When they pulled apart, Noah was standing at the garden gate, watching with wide eyes. Does this mean Isabella is staying forever? Adrian laughed, reaching out an arm. Noah ran to them, and they pulled him into their embrace. 3 people who had been broken in different ways, finding wholeness together. Yes, Adrian said, looking at Isabella with love that no longer frightened either of them. Forever. The roses bloomed around them, and somewhere in the fading light, Isabella could almost hear her mother's voice. You were always meant for more than surviving, my darling. You were meant to bloom. The engagement was announced quietly, without fanfare. Adrian sent notices to the necessary papers, informed his closest associates, and braced for the inevitable reactions. They came swiftly, some congratulatory, others coolly distant, a few outright hostile. Lady Pemberton, a matriarch of society, sent a cutting letter suggesting Adrian had lost his senses to a fortune hunter's pretty face. Isabella read it over breakfast, the words designed to wound, and found they bounced off her like rain on stone. She's afraid, Isabella said, setting the letter aside, of anything that challenges how she understands the world. Adrian looked at her with pride. When did you become so wise? When I stopped letting other people's fear define me. The wedding was set for midsummer. Isabella wanted something small, intimate, just family and the few friends who had proven themselves genuine. Mrs. Davison threw herself into preparations with joy, and even Lord Edward showed unexpected enthusiasm, personally reviewing the guest list with the intensity of a military campaign. We'll invite the Ashfords, the Sterlings, and Lord Michaels, he declared, all good families who value character over gossip, and we'll seat Lady Pemberton near the kitchen entrance, if she deigns to attend. Father, Adrian said, fighting a smile. What? I'm being charitable. I could seat her outside. Isabella laughed, and Lord Edward's stern expression softened. He'd grown fond of her, this girl who'd reclaimed her name and refused to be diminished. Sometimes she caught him watching her with something like paternal pride, and it filled a hollow place she'd carried for years. But as the wedding approached, Isabella found herself thinking of Helena, not with anger anymore, but with something more complicated. She'd received word that Varga Manor was being sold. Helena's mismanagement had finally caught up with her. Clara had married hastily to a merchant's son. Lily remained teaching in the village, independent but struggling. Do you want to invite her? Adrian asked one evening, finding Isabella staring at a letter from Lily. Your aunt? No. The answer was immediate. But I want to help Lily. She's trying to build a different life. I know what that's like. Adrian nodded. Then we'll help her. They arranged for Lily to receive a modest allowance from Isabella's inheritance, enough to live comfortably, to continue teaching without desperation. When Isabella wrote to tell her, Lily's response came tear-stained and grateful. You owe me nothing, she wrote, but you're giving me everything, a chance to be more than what Mother made us. Thank you, Isabella. Thank you for showing me that kindness isn't weakness. Isabella folded the letter carefully, adding it to the others. Forgiveness was complicated, but it was also freedom. Noah had become obsessed with the wedding. He asked daily about details, insisted on being involved in every decision, and announced to anyone who would listen that he was getting a proper mother now. What should I call you? He asked Isabella one afternoon in the library, after the wedding. Still Isabella? Or Mother? Or something else? Isabella knelt before him, taking his small hands. You can call me whatever feels right to you, Noah. There's no rule that says you have to forget your first mother to love me. You can have both in your heart. What if I can't remember her anymore? His voice was small, frightened. What if I forget? Then I'll help you remember, Isabella promised. Your father has stories about her. Mrs. Davison knew her. We'll keep her alive in the things we share with you. Love doesn't erase love, sweetheart. It multiplies. Noah thought about this, then nodded. I think I'll call you Mama. Is that all right? Isabella's eyes filled with tears. That's more than all right. He hugged her tightly, and she held this child who had chosen her as fiercely as she had chosen him. The days passed in a blur of preparations. Isabella's gown was created by a seamstress in the village, simple but elegant, with lace that had belonged to Adrian's grandmother. She spent hours in fittings, pins and fabric, and quiet conversations with women who were slowly becoming friends. 1 week before the wedding, Isabella returned to the rose garden alone. She needed a moment of stillness, of reflection. So much had changed. She'd arrived at Blackwood Manor as someone else's mistake, and now she stood as someone's choice, as her own choice. Nervous, Adrian's voice came from behind her. Isabella turned, smiling, terrified, but the good kind. He joined her on the bench, taking her hand. His thumb traced the sapphire ring she now wore constantly. Any regrets? Not a single one. She leaned against his shoulder. I spent so long believing I wasn't meant for happiness, that I was the punishment in someone else's story. But this, she gestured to the garden, the manor beyond, the life they were building. This is proof that stories can change, that we can rewrite our endings. Or our beginnings, Adrian said softly. Yes, Isabella agreed. Our beginnings. The roses swayed in the evening breeze, witnesses to promises not yet spoken but already felt. In 7 days, Isabella would walk down an aisle and become a duchess. But more than that, she would become exactly who she'd always been meant to be. Herself, wholly and unapologetically, loved and loving in return. The wedding day arrived with golden sunlight and cloudless skies. Isabella woke early, her heart beating a rhythm between excitement and disbelief. Mrs. Davison came to help her dress, tears already streaming down the housekeeper's face. "Look at you," she whispered, fastening the last button. "From that frightened girl in the window to this. You're radiant, dear." Isabella studied herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was someone she barely recognized, not because she'd changed externally, but because she finally saw herself clearly. Strong, worthy, loved. A knock came at the door. "May I?" Lord Edward's voice, uncharacteristically tentative. Of course. He entered, stopping short when he saw her. For a moment, emotion flickered across his usually stern features. "You look remarkable. Your father would have been extraordinarily proud." Isabella's throat tightened. "I wish he could have been here. In a way he is." Lord Edward approached, pulling a small box from his pocket. "These were your mother's. Helena claimed there was nothing left, but I had my solicitors dig deeper. Your father had stored some of her belongings with his lawyer, things he couldn't bear to keep at home after she passed, but couldn't part with either." Isabella opened the box with trembling hands. Inside lay a delicate pearl necklace and matching earrings, along with a folded letter in her father's handwriting. She unfolded it carefully, the paper yellowed with age. "My dearest Isabella, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and I pray you have grown into the remarkable woman I know you will become. Your mother's greatest fear was that you would forget how deeply you were loved, how wanted you were. We chose your name together, Isabella, meaning pledged to God, because from the moment we knew of you, you were our answered prayer. Life may not be kind to you. The world can be cruel to women, especially those without protection. But remember this. You carry your mother's courage and my stubborn refusal to accept defeat. You are not an accident or a burden. You are the best thing I ever helped create. Whatever comes, my darling girl, know that you were loved fiercely and completely. That can never be taken from you. Your father always." Isabella couldn't stop the tears. Mrs. Davison rushed forward with a handkerchief, but Lord Edward waved her off gently. "Let her cry," he said softly. "These are the tears that heal." When Isabella composed herself, she fastened the pearls around her neck, feeling her parents' presence settle over her like a blessing. "Thank you," she told Lord Edward, "for everything, for finding these, for believing I was worth fighting for." "You made that easy," he said gruffly, clearing his throat. Now shall we? My son is likely pacing a hole in the chapel floor. The ceremony was held in Blackwood's private chapel, a small stone building covered in climbing roses. The guests were few but genuine, people who had seen past scandal to the truth of what Isabella and Adrian had built together. Lily sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes. Lady Ashford attended, her sharp gaze missing nothing but her expression approving. A handful of neighboring families, Lord Edward's oldest friends, and the entire household staff, who had come to love their future Duchess. And Noah, standing beside his father as best man, practically vibrating with excitement in his small suit. When the doors opened and Isabella stepped into the chapel on Lord Edward's arm, the world narrowed to a single point: Adrian, standing at the altar, looking at her as if she were the answer to every question he'd ever asked. They'd written their own vows. When the vicar nodded, Adrian spoke first, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Isabella, you came into my life when I convinced myself I was finished living. You were quiet and careful, like you were apologizing for existing. And slowly, I watched you remember who you were meant to be. You didn't need me to save you. You saved yourself. But you let me stand beside you while you did it, and that has been the greatest honor of my life. I promise to choose you every day, to build a life where you never have to make yourself small, to love you not in spite of your past, but because of everything it made you. You are my second chance, my unexpected blessing, and I will spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of the gift of your love." Isabella's hands trembled as she spoke. "Adrian, when you found me, I believed I was nothing, a mistake, a burden. You didn't try to convince me otherwise with words. You showed me through actions. You gave me space to grow, challenges to meet, and trust when I had no reason to expect it. You loved your son enough to teach him that hearts can heal, and you loved me enough to wait while I learned to believe I deserved it. I promised to be your partner, not your dependent, to share your burdens and your joys, to love Noah as my own, to choose this, to choose us every single day. You gave me a home, but more than that, you helped me become someone who knew she deserved one." The vicar pronounced them husband and wife, and when Adrian kissed her, the chapel erupted in applause. Noah cheered loudest of all. Isabella stood in the rose garden, her hands resting on the swell of her pregnant belly, watching Noah chase his younger sister through the flower beds. Emma, nearly 3 years old, shrieked with laughter as her brother pretended to be a fearsome dragon. "Careful," Isabella called. "The real dragon is napping inside, and if you wake her, there will be consequences." Noah grinned, scooping Emma up carefully. At 12, he'd grown tall and confident, with Adrian's serious eyes but warmth that was entirely his own. "We'll be quiet, Mama. Promise." "Mama." The words still filled her with wonder. Adrian emerged from the house, the youngest daughter, 6-month-old Rose, cradled in his arms. "Someone decided napping was optional," he said, settling beside Isabella on the bench. Rose grabbed at his collar, babbling contentedly. "She has your stubborn streak," Isabella teased. "She has your determination. There's a difference." Adrian kissed her temple, then the baby's head. "Mrs. Davison says tea is ready when we are. She's made Noah's favorite biscuits." Bribing him before Latin lessons. Survival strategy. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their children play. Blackwood Manor had transformed over the years, not just in restoration, but in spirit. The house breathed differently now, filled with laughter and noise, and the beautiful chaos of a family that had chosen each other. Isabella's inheritance had been put to good use. She'd established a foundation for young women without families, providing education, housing, and most importantly, choice. Lily ran the program's day-to-day operations, having discovered a gift for advocacy and teaching. They'd reconciled slowly, building something new from broken foundations. Helena had died 2 years ago. Isabella had attended the funeral out of duty, feeling nothing but a distant sadness for a woman who'd spent her life building walls instead of bridges. Clara had sent a brief note of condolence, but hadn't attended. Some wounds remained too deep. "Penny for your thoughts?" Adrian asked. just thinking about how different everything is. How different I am. Isabella touched her mother's pearls, which she still wore regularly. Sometimes I miss her, the girl I was. She was scared, but she was also brave in ways she didn't recognize. She's still here, Adrian said softly. Every choice you make, every person you help. That girl who survived Helena's cruelty, who fled into the night not knowing where she'd go. She's the foundation of the woman you became. Lord Edward's voice boomed from the terrace. Are we having tea or admiring shrubbery? I didn't come all this way to watch plants. Your father is particularly charming today, Isabella laughed. He's excited. The Ashfords are bringing their granddaughter. He's already planning a match with Noah. Noah is 12. My father thinks long-term. They gathered for tea on the terrace, an extended family pieced together from loss and love. Lord Edward held Rose while debating politics with Lady Ashford, who gave as good as she got. Mrs. Davison fussed over everyone, her official title now estate manager, but her true role something closer to family matriarch. Noah practiced French with Lady Ashford's granddaughter, a bright girl his age who seemed equally unimpressed and intrigued by him. Emma climbed into Isabella's lap, sticky fingers and all. Mama, tell the story about the girl in the window. It had become tradition, Isabella's story, softened for young ears but honest in its bones. A girl who thought she was nothing, who discovered she was everything. Once upon a time, Isabella began, there was a girl who lived in an attic. As she spoke, Adrian's hand found hers under the table. She squeezed back, grounding herself in the present while honoring the past. The story had a different ending now, not happily ever after, because life was more complicated than that, but happily continuing. A life built on choices and second chances, on love that multiplied rather than divided. When the story ended, Emma sighed contentedly. I'm glad she found her home. So am I, sweetheart, Isabella whispered. So am I. That evening, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into peaceful quiet, Isabella and Adrian returned to the rose garden. The blooms glowed in the moonlight, their fragrance heavy on the summer air. Any regrets? Adrian asked, as he had on their wedding day, as he did sometimes still. Isabella looked at the manor, her home, earned and chosen, at the family they'd built from broken pieces, at the life she'd created not by accident, but by deliberate, courageous choice. Not one, she said, not a single one. Adrian pulled her close, and they stood among the roses, two people who had been lost now found, who had survived their own stories and written new ones together. The girl in the window was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who loved fiercely, who had transformed survival into a life worth living. And that, Isabella thought as the stars emerged overhead, was the truest happy ending of all.